Great. We're now going to look at the hottest aircraft market in the world, and we got one of the hottest US lawyers. Unfortunately, he was unavailable, but David Hernandez is going to moderate this panel.
Thanks for you tonight. Our panelists, got Mike Dwyer from Jetcraft, president of Jetcraft. Guardian Jet, sorry. Sorry. Right. I got my, so Dave Dixon, president of Jetcraft Asia. And both of them have very distinguished careers, decades of experience in aviation, both as aircraft sales as well as OEMs. So it should be a very interesting and knowledgeable panel. And what we have today is the rise of the U.S., what's driving U.S. sales, moving aircraft between the U.S. and Asia, and also how to bring Asia and U.S. buyers together, buyers and sellers together culturally. Should be an interesting question. Remember, all these questions are anonymous, so if you want to throw some fire bombs up here, feel free. And I'm buying drinks for everybody after this, so ask whatever questions you like. So let me start off first with, the U.S. market is really going berserk in terms of sales. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And I'd like to get both of your experience or just input on some of the things that I thought that are driving the market. So, trying to move these slides. There we go. Uh-oh. I feel what Jeffrey feels. Right?
You want me to take a crack at it while we're getting the screen up?
Well, let's just talk generally until we get the slides done. What's your thoughts, each of you, about the U.S. market?
So first and foremost, I'll start what I think is the most important and least tangible, and it's just confidence. The U.S. business community is its most confident that we've seen it in decades. The current administration is a big part of that, and that's uniformly distributed between Fortune stack companies to the middle class, companies that are buying the light and mid-sized jets. That is what I always said would be a recovery of our industry, is the light and mid-size coming back, and that's doing so, down to the high net worth individuals and the hedge fund private equity folks. So that's good news. Very tangibly, you have from the new administration, number one, a corporate tax rate essentially cut in half. Number two, bonus depreciation, 100% bonus depreciation back on pre-owned aircraft for the first time in history, retroactive to 2017, and that has just not only accelerated a tremendous amount of activity that's tax-driven like any tax-based asset, but also what we think will keep it going through fourth quarters for us can usually be 40% of our year. After a roaring 17, we saw our biggest first quarter, and usually you'll see a little dip there. Biggest second quarter, and we think it'll be Katie bar the door in the fourth quarter. And then, of course, the last thing, very tangible, our Dow sank to 6,000 points in the heyday of our economic problems less than a decade ago. We're at 25,000 now. So there's been a massive creation of wealth in the United States. So those are, Mr. Trump doesn't get credit for the Dow where it is, but certainly the tax reform has been, and the confidence in the country, in our business community.
Right. And so put a little, until we get our slides up. So in terms of the tax reform, what the U.S. has done as of December, basically, is we've lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21% flat across the board. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of pent-up demand for people waiting on the fence to see what would happen. That's been a huge impetus in getting deals done. We just recently had a change to internal tax structure, our bonus depreciation, meaning that you can depreciate fully aircraft once you buy them 100% if it's used for business. And I'd like to also talk about, both of you, your experience with just generally, are there other factors involved in terms of the market? Maybe broker activity, how transactions are done, maybe the increase in back-to-back transactions? Are brokers stepping in before deals are listed and trying to buy up the deals themselves, flip them? What other external factors are moving the market forward?
Is this going to be working, by the way?
Yeah, I'm going to. It soon will be.
Being here in Asia, then I'm sort of perhaps the recipient and the negative recipient of the positivity in the US, because one of the factors in Asia is that decisions seem to take a long time. And the US has the ability to move quickly on pre-owned airplanes. And there's a nervousness, there's a lack of confidence and understanding what people are buying sometimes, and they come back and say, well, you offered me this airplane and it's gone. Well, someone else put money down. The US wheel machine is moving very well oiled and very quickly. So Asia's losing out a little bit on the opportunities. Personally, I think the real bottom feeders there's nothing left there in the bottom. It's all coming back up again, almost across all brands, all types, in all areas. There's always an exception, but generally speaking, that's the case. But here, the key difference that's made my life much, much more interesting recently is the change from having been with an OEM when the market started to now being with the pre-owned market principally, and finding that there's an acceptance of that product here in Asia, which didn't exist previously. It was a new. And we've now got a situation where they're not just first-time buyers, they're first-time sellers. So for me, that's the most big difference, that now I'm educating the people I'd educated to buy now how to sell. So the changes here are positive in the sense that it's becoming more adjusted to the pre-owned product. It's becoming more flexible, it's understanding the trades, and that's something we do actively with credit lines. We're able to step into the middle and actually make a transaction happen. So we're probably a better place to generate some transactions which otherwise would not have happened.
Question.
David and Mike, when a good pre-owned aircraft is in the market, let's say it's a 5-year-old global, how quickly is it coming off the market? How quickly does the buyer need to move them?
So near new, and I would not just say 550, but I'd say flat floor 3,000 plus miles. So Challenger 350, Gulfstream 280, that category and up, the good equipment is going before it gets to the market. And there's some dealers with enough critical mass like Jetcraft and AvPro, and we're kind of distant cousin, hopefully climbing the charts. But where we've got enough of our own clientele that we're offering that equipment to first, or discussing before we come to the market with those premier brokers that I just discussed, and they're not getting to the market. So it's going that fast. The other thing that I was going to talk about, which is sort of counterintuitive to making it buyers accelerate their activity, is that prices have now gone up. The super mid to ultra long range prices have now increased by 5 to 10%, which is wonderful considering the slide they were on of 12% a year. So what's that done for the first time buyer is brought him into the market. The guy that was trading in the slide was always still winning, right? Because he was doubling down on what he currently owned. And while he was getting killed selling, he was killing somebody buying at saving $2 for everyone he lost. What's happened to us now in the last 6 months, and it's been so much fun, is the first-time buyer, the fractional guy coming out of no airplane is going, hey, I know I missed the bottom, but is it still a good time to buy? So, the savvy buyer is, now he knows he's not on the slide, pricing stabilized, and now it's starting to tick up. So they're jumping in the market. They're also jumping in at much larger aircraft. It was one of my questions yesterday. We're seeing much younger buyers, and we're also seeing their first airplanes. If you're as old as me, you go back to where people started in Citations and worked their way up to a Hawker, and they're just jumping in at a much higher level because they're coming out of fractional, VistaJet, wheels up, extremely high levels of equipment and service, and so they're just starting bigger. So that, I don't know if it's a long answer, but that's kind of where we see it.
So while we're getting the slides set up, a couple questions here. Let's take that first one. How much does the typical Asian buyer overpay versus a super informed U.S. buyer with their fancy brokers? A little bit of a loaded question there, but...
I'll take that one. The information I have walking down Nathan Road or Orchard Road is the same as my colleague in Wall Street or any other street in North America. The information is the same.
All right, so we have our slides up and running. So let's go to... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, David, a couple questions. One maybe for you. We have a lot of Asian or APAC customers who have U.S. entities with profit appetite, right? So that gives us an opportunity to position our aircraft, you know, and allow them to take the bonus depreciation. The common question is, what are the conditions, right? Can they take the bonus depreciation and if they wanted to, say, use it outside of the U.S., keep it en-reg, is that a problem? Second question is, what if they want, after one fiscal year or so later, lease it to another offshore non-U.S. entity?
Oh, it's a tough question. And I think this is the issue that's affecting a lot of people now. It's happening as we speak. So U.S. tax law only applies to U.S. tax citizens in particular with respect to bonus depreciation. So you have to be very careful if you set up a U.S. LLC. Be very careful. I mean, this is not tax planning for anybody, so don't quote me. Hire a tax professional. But every situation is very unique. But I would say look at the tax law specifically because it's only for U.S. Taxpayers.
No, these are U.S. taxpayers. There are billion-dollar profit companies in the U.S., right? They have headquarters in Asia.
Right. Okay. So in that case, I mean, I think there's a lot of flexibility and they could benefit if the use is actual business use. We have a lot of high net worth individuals who own and operate aircraft, but they want to use it for personal use. And your personal use then impacts your depreciation by a pro rata basis. So I'd say, you know, there's huge advantages if this does work because you can buy in 100% depreciation. That's a big advantage. And that's why I think it's generating such huge transactions in the United States. Again, seek a tax professional. We can chat afterwards if you like. Second question?
Yeah.
Okay.
One for David or Mike. You know, the pre-owned inventory is a 20-year low in 1999. Just wanted to know, in the U.S., how many pre-owned transactions take place annually over the last couple of years versus what are you seeing now? What's the delta, like, in terms of stats?
It's roughly now 50-50 in terms of pre-owned versus new. Is that what you were asking?
No, I say, you know, on average, how many pre-owned transactions happen in the U.S. on an annual basis normally, and what's the uptick this year?
So we track 130 models from like the PC-12 to the Global 6000. I think the number, so I'll just round because it's close, but 1,500 in 2017, 1,500 transactions and amongst 500 brokers. And that's, if you cut half of that out because they're old and small and you don't really care, maybe in this room, but just do the math of 60%, we've all heard that statistic, you know, in the last couple of days, 60% of the transactions in the U.S. By the way, for new deliveries from that flat floor and up, it's closer to 80% in 2018. So reflecting how hot the market is. But, so, you know, 1,500 times 0.6, 6,000, you know, no. Thank you.
Okay. You got the wrong version in there. You got to use version 2. Okay, so we'll continue on. So one of the topics is how to bring Asian and North American buyers together, buyers and sellers together. David? Yep. Oh. Let me preface this. Vedder price had nothing to do with that picture.
I took that picture.
Okay. Yeah.
So these two gentlemen, I think they're still here. If you're lucky, you'll catch them around the marina. Anyway, the other two gentlemen have gone, thank goodness. Anyway.
Was that at Bricks on Monday night?
I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
The Korean, the Asian gentleman is from Hong Kong, and the other gentleman is somewhere in the States, but anyway, they've been making a good living recently. But I say, jokingly say, CJI and join ASBAA. ASBAA is the region's effort at trying to help, self-help this business and bring some of the benefits of North America to Asia and the knowledge base. Can you switch to the next thing?
Yep.
Don't need to stare at those two too long. I went earlier because we weren't sure about the slide sequence. Anyway, when I first came here for business aircraft, in the late 90s, it was all first-time buyers. The main buyers in China were the government. There wasn't a word called private. Remember that. China doesn't recognize private in many respects, in those days anyway. So everyone was first-time buyers. So the dynamic has changed hugely. Now you've got the situation where, again, is it possible to
Again, yeah.
flick? Now we've got a situation where from being almost 100% new to being 50-50 split in the case of Asia. We've seen about 50, close to 60 increase in the fleet over the last 12 months or so. Depends what your definition of Asia. Some people have India, some people don't, some people in Australia don't. It all depends where you cut the cake. But overall, and the statistic I saw yesterday was the reference to Venice, where in terms of a market relative to the US, it's still actually very small. I used to say some time ago there are more aircraft in California than the whole of Asia, and that's India, Australia, that's China. So we're in a very shallow pond. But it is one of the youngest fleets. And coming to this subject of the rise of the US market can take advantage of the fact that a lot of these airplanes are relatively new. They're not beat up old wrecks. The other issue is there are first-time buyers in America. Have you ever heard of that? First-time buyer buying from Asia. I remember the horror on a gentleman's face when I said, I've got a nice airplane for you in Macau. He said, where the blank is Macau? He came back for 5 airplanes, ultimately. Once the education process had been got through, it wasn't painful, but the understanding of what an Asian-based airplane might offer is as much informing Mr. X in downtown Dallas as it is me trying to sell something over here. That process is, I think, fundamental. Getting the American market to understand who we are, because their ignorance, please, not the word ignorant is the wrong word, lack of knowledge. Next point. Next slide.
Well, I mean, let me stop you there, and that's a good point. I think, so when we talk about the Asian market, I mean, we've done deals in different parts of the world, different countries in Asia, obviously. And I think it's kind of a misnomer to say there's just one market, because there's many different countries, many different cultures, and I think that you can't really say that there's one particular type of stereotypical buyer, just like in the States. Dealing with someone from the New York area is very different from dealing with someone in Dallas. And Mike, let me get your thoughts on that. When doing deals with Asia, I mean, is there things that you think Americans could do differently from a cultural perspective? I always keep hearing times kill deals, and particularly with the Asian deals, it just takes longer. And I tell people it's going to take longer. So what are your thoughts on cultural differences and just how to deal with different types of transactions?
So I'll speak more to the selling from Asia into America, because that's what I have more experience with. The best thing that you can do is engage remember I said 500 brokers in those 1,500 transactions, so we're a cottage industry. You're looking at, between Jetcraft and Avpro, the 2 biggest players. Again, we're trying to catch them, but what's happening is when buying a jet from Asia from Jetcraft is like buying a jet from Ohio. I mean, I'll add 90 days and $250,000 because there's just some import issues. Hopefully you get a business class airfare to, send a team to evaluate it, and the costs just mount. What we see that can be difficult in the U.S. is sometimes the high net worth Asian seller doesn't want to give an exclusive listing to sell, and I don't control all of our prospects, but we'll be presented the same airplane by numerous brokers, and that just creates confusion in the marketplace and a difficulty to execute the transaction. So, you know, that's number one is I think the best thing an Asian seller or any seller can do is just get a reputable, exclusive arrangement with somebody that's, you know, and then it don't care if it's Ohio or Singapore. So that's one. The other is, the answer is always it depends. If the airplane's not being operated, like if it's gone out of service because it's a repo from a bank, please, I'm nervous to say this, I don't want to be the flashy American broker or arrogant American, but bring it to the U.S. I mean, that's 60 to 80% of the market, and the rest of the world is 40%. And that doesn't mean you don't use your local broker for that representation, but fly it to a service center and register it. I was talking to a bank 2 years ago on a Hawker 800 XP in London. London is a very sophisticated, mature jet market. And I said, fly it to the service center and register it. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I might not find an American buyer. So look at the data. As David said, the data is the data. 13 sales in the last 6 months, 1 in Portugal, 1 in Canada, 11 in the U.S. That's not, we're not subtly, you know, interpreting, it's not your gut. That's you know, pretty straightforward. So there are some times when I think moving the airplane to the biggest market in the world makes some sense. So that obviously doesn't apply if the principal or company is still using the airplane in their daily course, then they want it. But those are just some thoughts.
And let me highlight that from just a legal perspective. We're just involved with a deal with Guardian Jet and Jeffrey, you guys, a couple weeks ago. It makes a huge difference. Compare and contrast to a deal that I've been involved with where the other side had no knowledgeable representation. We were selling a plane into China, and they wanted to put it on the N registry. And their counsel relied on our broker, which was, he was closed to begin with, in the bad deal, if you will. And they tried to set up the N registry the day of closing. I mean, excuse me, the trust, the day of closing. And it just doesn't work. Everything takes time. And trying to translate documents into Mandarin, you know, the day of, it's never going to happen. So it delayed the transaction about 3 or 4 weeks just to get everything done. It's much more difficult. And when I say difficult, that translates into legal fees, trying to get everything done at the last minute. So my advice would be, and you guys can chime if you'd like, just hire reputable counsel. It'll save you in the long run much more money and a lot less frustration. And so, you know, certainly there are cultural issues. I mean, obviously mutual respect, but you know, there are people in the States that I'm sure you and I both can mention that we hate dealing with. They're just arrogant. They're no fun. But that happens throughout the world. I mean, the United States doesn't have a monopoly on arrogant people, but it happens all out the world. And so that's what I would say is, look, hire counsel that have experience in aircraft transactions, and you'll have a much better transaction. David, any thoughts on that? Or?
Yeah, and I think if we can go to the next slide, which tries to sort of help. There's a slightly different environment here, and I'm coming back to this education of the buyer in North America or somewhere, you know, maintenance. Are the records all in Chinese? I get that question, and it's on the Cayman register. I don't know where the Cayman representative is in the audience, but I'm not pretty certain they can't read Chinese. So questions like that, understanding what you're actually getting when you go out and offer an airplane, documentation, is it, you know, can I read it? It's rather a strange thing. The maintenance facilities here, Jet have been here 25 years, and they were the first that pitched tent in this region. And I remember used to say to people up in Tokyo or people down in Australia or in India, we have support in Singapore. That's like saying to someone in New York, go to Rio. If you're in London, go to Dakar in Senegal. He's going to kick you out of the room if you said that today. So the things have changed. So you've got many more facilities around the region, the capabilities, there's brand names that people in North America and Europe will recognize, and that's giving confidence to the buyer in other parts of the world. Okay, we'll take and consider an airplane from here, and I think that's important. The one area that I've got a bit of a hobby horse on is this one of aircraft condition, and I think everybody in this room has a concern, even if they don't realize it, whether you fly it, maintain it, manage it, whether you insure it, or whether you have a loan against it. It is the conditions under which airplanes are being trapped by some airports, the conditions under which owners don't understand the value that they are losing in an airplane which goes in for an 8C and comes out with a monumental check, a monumental bill because of work they've ignored. They'll spend thousands and thousands of dollars looking after a Lamborghini or a McLaren, but won't spend the right money on looking after their airplane. I find that astonishing. And I think everybody here needs to get that message across. And I say to the banks and the people who lend the money, if you repossessed an airplane at 7.5 years and it's got an 8-year check, get ready for some big bills. I say to the OEMs, start bringing forward some of the corrosion check requirements. Force it on the management, force it on the owners. Make it a condition of the finance, because that will have negative value and people in North America will spot that. I've had a situation where brand X, the PPI here at a certain company at Salita took 2 days. They walked away after 2 days. Don't want it. I had one where an inspection, instead of costing $500,000, cost $1.3 million. And that airplane was done in the States. You've all gone very quiet. But that's some of the realities. That's the one area we as a business in this part of the world need to concentrate.
Okay.
Oh yeah, certification, sorry, China, because the slides have gone out of sync. People sometimes don't appreciate a Chinese registered airplane. They sort of a bit nervous. That's a 135 airplane. Usually the second or third owners of an airplane will going to go into charter, part-time charter when they're not using it. That's a big plus to retrofit a lot of these airplanes to get it to 135. A Chinese airplane is 135 out of the box. That's a big plus.
Okay, let's talk about aircraft condition.
I'm just going over some of the points and things. Like everyone's a stakeholder in that subject of the condition of the airplane.
So, Mike, your perspective on a buyer looking for planes in Asia. Any different thoughts on that in terms of what David said, maintenance?
Yeah, so, well, the good news for the Asian market selling to an American buyer is we're just going farther afield to find the airplanes because of all the conditions. The near new, less than 3 years, less than 1,000 hours, 5 years market is evaporated, so it's gone. So we're gonna want to do the way we're gonna want to come here and buy is go screen the airplane, and then we'll have a conversation about where is the pre-purchase inspection. Does it happen in this theater, or will you allow it to come back to the United States? The way we entice sellers to let us inspect in the USA is we say instead of a soft refundable deposit that goes hard during the inspection, we'll give you a firm deposit up front. And of course, pay for the cost to move it. So we try to be fair and equitable and make concessions for that to happen. Even if we can get an inspection in the U.S., we certainly want a bore scope here before we go, because you know that's one of your big showstoppers in doing a cursory inspection or condition 2-day, we call it a screening, plus a bore scope. So that's one way we think we can bring the U.S. and Asian buyers together. Also, and this isn't just a complaint of Asian buyers, but remember the second home for an ultra-long range airplane is usually a high net worth individual buying his first category airplane in that category, or now in some cases his first airplane. And those are individually driven, very fast moving. Like, you know, they're drafting. If we like to provide the draft of the first sales agreement because it'll be out in a day. That's our goal, within 1 to 2 days. We're hoping. What's a typical, David, negotiation period for a sales agreement? 10 business days, 2 weeks?
No, I don't. So again, it depends on who's on the other side and who you have representing. So, you know, our deal we just finished with Asian buyer, we got it turned around in 3 days, 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. So we have people saying on Friday, so Monday, do I get my plane on Monday? That's their operational tempo. So anything we can do to accelerate. By the way, the reason I say that's not a commentary just about Asia, corporate America doesn't move that fast.
Right.
I mean, but the person buying the airplanes that I think are going to be coming, that are coming out of this region, the near new great condition, large cabin, our experience in the U.S. is that's going to an individual, and he wants to go fast.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the concerns we always say, lawyers are deal killers. In fact, I think our primary job is just to mitigate risk, and it takes time to identify the risk. And when you're dealing with a cross-border transaction, you want to look at all the risks that are potentially there, meaning, just the logistics. How's it going to go on the end registry? How's it going to be deregistered? Who's going to be responsible for it? Where's the pre-buy? All of those things, and the potential legal consequences of what happens if something goes wrong. How do I get our deposit back? Or how do I keep their deposit? What's the litigation risk? All of those things. And if there's financing, that's a whole other thing we have to worry about. All of that stuff we have to factor into, and that's the thing, working with brokers to make sure that all of those things are addressed. And it's very helpful to have experienced folks that handle these things. Let's go to one of these questions here. How about, this third one down. How soon will the speed of the market in the U.S. affect Asia? Oh, where'd it go? By changing behaviors in Asia and increasing sales cycle. I don't necessarily know if it's about changing behaviors, but go ahead. David, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I get the whole question, but
You may not.
the resources in Asia are growing all the time, and whether it's legal, whether it's financial. I mean, just some of the U.S., North American, European banks and lawyers and legal firms, practices, etc., are all here. So I mean, the ability to move the transaction around has greatly improved to the point where, for example, in my company's case, we're putting a legal contract person here in the country, a proper legal person, a contract administrator. Administrators to a penny, a legal person to try and sort of real time get on with the problems, because the demands, the speed of the transaction are growing all the time. So that's the sort of responding to what's happened. A few years ago, you wouldn't even think about that. You would rely on someone in the middle of Chicago or New York to come back to you in sort of a day or two, maybe, perhaps. So I think the Asian market is maturing as this presence and the growth of things like this, the air shows in Shanghai, etc., show that the level of activity here is rapidly increasing.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that question. So I think it's already impacting behaviors all over the world. I mean, you hear a great sucking sound into the U.S. of all these aircraft coming in. And it's not as bad as it was, or I shouldn't say it's not the levels as it was in, say, 2006 and 2007, but you're seeing that. And how that's changing behaviors is all those people, the sellers internationally, were sitting on the sidelines saying, should I sell now? And our answer is absolutely. And talking with you guys, I mean, now's a great time. If you're thinking about selling, there's a huge market there in the U.S., and so I think it's already changing behaviors. I don't know to what extent, but...
So I think it's already changed behavior because, again, the most desirable and what I think most of the inventory here that started out as new fits the category of what the U.S. wants, okay? And that market's already dried up. So 2 years ago, we bought no airplanes in Asia. This year, we'll buy 6. So it's already affecting Asian markets. The thing that I think is really going to drive the markets, and it's good news for everybody, not just for Asia, is, the OEM should really answer this, but here's my view of the OEM world, is that in the last 12 months, they transitioned from 1 to 2 year lead time, depending on the model or paper airplane or new coming into service, to, but maybe we could fit you into something this year if you were ready to go, to where now you're just seeing the activity accelerate and the backlogs push out. I think we're 6 to 12 months away from solid 2-year backlogs at the OEMs, and that's going to take the pricing of the entire used market and shift it up in, I think, a big way. Because a new versus near new buyer will wait 6 to 9 months. When the delta between the two is 10 to 20%. But he won't wait 2 years. And so I think that'll push that delta up. Near new was selling at 20 to 25% below new. That delta will go up to 10%. So I think there's another 10 to 15% increase in the next 12 months if I'm right about the backlogs at the OEMs.
Could I just add something on
Go
that?
ahead.
On the virtually all the new aircraft are in the mid to large cabin range. And there's a lot of new airplanes, the 500, the 600. I can't believe Gulfstream won't do something in response to the 7,500, if I get that right. You've got the 7,500, you've got the ATEX. Every one of those buyers has got something today, and they'll be pushing that onto the market. So there's a lot of business there for us as people seek to place one of those airplanes. And I think one of the reasons the market took a bit of a downturn, and we had this reference, I think, was the Acapulco dive in the values, was that people were offering both airplanes for sale. The new one they had on order and the one they had at the day. They say, whichever goes first, we'll sell. They didn't want to own two airplanes. It was too expensive. That is an expensive hobby. What will be interesting to see how, when the impact of the 500, 600, 700, I'm going to say 7,500, 7,500, the ATEX, etc. And all those are going to push airplanes onto the market. One OEM I know has got 47 trades against his new coming airplane, against one brand, 47 trades coming. That's a lot of extra airplanes, a lot of extra customers, so there's still plenty of activity out there. It's not drying up in any means, it's growing.
Just quick run of the questions. Yes, a lot. Yes. Yes, maybe. And then that's all I can think. No, so let's talk about the broker. I mean, so this impacts everyone here. I think they're in the transactions world. Does the back-to-back transaction, does it skew the numbers? So what's going on in the States? I'm not disclosing any secrets. What's going on in the States is a lot of brokers have lines of credit with banks, and they buy these aircraft off inventory. So by the time you see a for sale or something, it's probably too late because the brokers know, they have the data, they search AMSTAT and other areas to see what planes are listed. And I have clients that are calling me saying, David, I'm getting these calls from these brokers asking if I want to sell the plane. So they're already looking for these deals before they even hit the market. So that's what's going on. And so, yeah, they're buying up these planes. There's a lot of risk. When I was at eBase just talking with people, they said, look, I don't make money off transactions. I make money off flipping planes. And so, granted, those are a lot of the smaller folks, but a lot of the bigger folks do that as well. And so what are your thoughts on back-to-back transactions, and does it skew the activity in the U.S.? And I guess, yeah, in Asia. I mean, is it prevalent as well?
The back-to-back?
Yeah, I mean, lines of credit.
There was a certain legal mind who yesterday obviously had a stutter because he kept saying back to back to back to back, which I thought was rather amusing because it showed a singular lack of understanding of what goes on. I can go in and buy another airplane and trade an airplane. So I take away the risk for the person who doesn't want two airplanes. He wants to buy this, he's got a good deal, he sees an airplane out that he wants, but he's got something else. Doesn't matter what it is. We can step in and take it. We have the credit lines, we have the banks, there's one or two of them, or the funding sources here. We will go and say, look, we want to take this position on this airplane. And we will give the seller of that airplane some upside. Yes, we're going to say, we take your risk. We are taking away your risk to own two airplanes. So if we get a better price and we've done our job and the market is moving in the right direction, we'll give a share of that upside. So whoever wrote that, or whoever keeps saying back to back to back to back, doesn't know what he is talking about.
Where's Paul?
So also, I would make a statement like if you talk to escrow, 70 to 80% of the trades they run through their books are still back to back. But remember, as you elevate the category of aircraft, you start to reduce it. It just becomes, you got a smarter buyer, he probably has representation, there's so much transparency out there. You can jump on controller.com, and if you want to make 15 phone calls, understand the market for sale. Doesn't make you a transaction expert or a maintenance expert, but you can understand value very quickly. So the back-to-back transactions work in an inefficient market. Imperfect knowledge, lack of liquidity. Right. All, the big markets have perfect liquidity. The people can afford it because they're in the market, and you have more perfect knowledge. So it's skewing it less and less, But the back-to-backs will just live in an unregulated industry with imperfect knowledge. And I have a good friend at home who's a bit of a pirate, and he can make more on a 15-year-old King Air, you know, jumping in and owning it, which is not necessarily a back-to-back when we think of the unethical, use the other guy's money and hide the real, but just buy low, sell high. That kind of gets lumped in the same back-to-back category. So anyway, larger category aircraft, less and less so. Just a smarter buyer and more knowledge.
One practical example, just pitch in there, I'm talking about China. Again, trying to sell the airplane in America, and someone else put a question up there which I thought was very relevant, moving the airplane to the States, put it on the N register. This particular buyer said, you get that airplane to the States on the N register, I'll buy it. He didn't want to, in his mind, although I don't think it was totally justified, want to have the risk of getting the airplane off the Chinese register. It is a bit complicated, it can be painful, but it is achievable. But they didn't want that to do. Say, David, you do that, and we'll buy it. Okay, so we did. That's the value that you can bring to some of these transactions. It's the unseen value that on the surface people don't see it, they don't understand it. They just know something's changed in Amstat, the ownership's changed, but they don't understand it.
By the way, remember that a lot of back-to-back behavior is not driven by arbitrage or unethical behavior. That does happen, but oftentimes the principals, a seller will say, I'm not going to give you a commission, bring me a deal, I might pay you, I might not, I won't put anything in writing. So that, you know, oftentimes that is I mean, in the U.S., people understand real estate. Yeah, I get paid by the seller. Well, that doesn't lend itself to acting as a buyer's agent. So, you know, there are some things that create the back-to-back beyond lack of regulation and a very wide range of ethical behaviors.
Got it. So, Mike and David, thank you. I think we're out of time, but we have, it looks like, hey, we're sponsoring the afternoon tea. So there's more time to chat after this, over tea, coffee, what have you. But again, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Al and Louisa, for putting this on. Thank you.